Congressman Dan Crenshaw recently stated that it is his assessment that our planet is being engaged by non-human intelligence. Now, before I share that amazing clip with you, I want to give you some quick background to who Representative Dan Crenshaw is. He served 10 years in the Navy SEALs, and during one of his operations in the theater of war, unfortunately, he got hit by the blast of an IED, and he lost one of his eyes, and his other eye was severely damaged. After his career in the SEALs, in 2018, he got elected as a congressman representing the state of Texas. Now, here's the clip that I want to share with you. It comes from the Real Brad Lee podcast, and it was published on February 1st.
Aliens. You start to see things coming out where the old government's releasing alien files. In your opinion, or do you know anything where you would say, are there aliens?
I don't know anything. I don't know anything more than you know. But it is fascinating. I mean, it seems to be incontrovertible evidence. Of the footage from the Navy, the testimonies. It really is something that we should be looking into, frankly, a little bit more than I'm aware that we are. I don't see how to deny the evidence that we've seen. What was crazy to me was how that evidence came out or at least it was formally acknowledged by the DOD this past year, and nobody cared. I was like, that's the sign of bad times in America, where it's like, hey, aliens are over here, and everybody's like, I don't care. COVID.
The first interesting sentiment that Representative Dan Crenshaw shares is he tells the hosts, I don't know any more than you do, which I think indicates that he was not officially briefed in a congressional capacity on UAP, as some other members of Congress were, because they were in the right committees that had a need to know. So his stance on whether or not we are being engaged by non-human intelligence is predicated on what's out in the open, in the public domain. He is citing some of the evidence that has come to the fore where Navy pilots and radar operators and technicians have all been 100% consistent, as far as I know, stating that technology was witnessed and recorded on sensor data displaying capacities that are beyond what we know exists within human civilization. Now, I agree with Representative Crenshaw that there does indeed seem to be incontrovertible evidence that we are being engaged by non-human intelligence. But of course, there are other possibilities. It could be that what was witnessed with those Navy pilots in 2004 and other periods of time, because this is happening all the time, and I'll get into that in a few seconds, but it could be that all these instances where it's collected from sensor data collection devices, and it's collected from eyewitness testimony from expert observers and so forth, it could be that they're just seeing something that is from an adversary, that maybe China or Russia has leapfrogged the United States technologically, or it could be something that is actually a Department of Defense property, but so few people know about it. Both of these are very unlikely, in my opinion, for a variety of reasons. For one, the United States has, by a long margin, the biggest budget for research and development in terms of creating military hardware. So it's unlikely that somehow China or Russia leapfrogged the United States. And for two, there have been many high-level officials, or a fair share of high-level officials, that would know or should know if something like this existed within the American arsenal, and they've all said, no, it does not, including Elizondo, by the way, and Chris Mellon, who at one point was I think he was the third highest level in intelligence within the Department of Defense, has all kinds of connections. He was also had oversight over special access programs, which are programs doing research into developing military hardware. At least that's some of the stuff they did. So the evidence is not that what the Navy is encountering is an adversary or some top secret asset that the United States has. The evidence strongly points in the direction that they don't know what it is, number one, and number two, it's better than anything the Americans, the Russians, or the Chinese have. And that doesn't leave us with a whole bunch of options as to where it could originate. Another very interesting thing that Representative Crenshaw said is, this is really something we should be looking into more than I'm aware that we are. And the key word in his statement is aware. For starters, everyone basically knew, as far as they knew, that the United States government stopped studying UAP with the close of Project Blue Book in 1969. And the fact of the matter is that anyone who would say, prior to, let's say, December 16th, 2017, prior to that date, anyone that would say, no, I don't believe it. I do not believe that the close of Project Blue Book was the end of the U.S. government's involvement in studying UAP technology. I don't believe it. Anyone who would say that would be looked at like a conspiracy theorist nut job by many, many people of high credibility. And that's reality. I don't care if you don't like what I say, that's reality. So allow me to partake in this beautiful, wondrous, stupendous custom that I've long partaken in of being seen as a conspiracy theorist nut job. Because I'm going to raise my ante. That's what I'm going to do. If you would have asked me prior to December 16th, 2017, or even October 11th, 2017, do I think the U.S. government is still studying things whizzing around in their airspace that they cannot ID and that they do not understand and they don't know what it is? I would say, yeah, like, duh. So let me be that guy once more. Do I think that OSAP, which is no longer around, that's an Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Applications Program, I believe, and so now there's ATIP that became UAP Task Force. So based upon what we know, there's only one program in the United States government studying UAP technology. Do I think that's the reality of the situation? No, I do not. I think it's ridiculous. I think that the most powerful, most well-funded military apparatus in the world, and that's been the case for decades and decades, no, I do not think they opted to discontinue studying machines in their airspace that can move and operate with impunity and can enter highly restricted airspace, and there's nothing the military can do about it. No, I do not think they desisted or they only allocated money for one program to try to figure out this mystery. No, I do not. Now, you could say, well, how do you know, Mr. Ryan? How do you know that it's not just adversarial craft or drones? Why are you assuming it's such exotic technology? Because that's what the evidence points to, in my opinion. That's what the evidence points to in the short term and in the long term and from the very beginning. Go watch the movie The Phenomenon by James Fox. You can rent it on YouTube for a couple $. This has been going on for decades. And it has been represented by layers and layers and layers and layers of evidence. Whether it's documents that have been attained through Freedom of Information Act, where we have government officials talking about UAPs soberly, saying that they are real. Whether it's people that work at nuclear installations all across America, whether it's laboratories or test sites or weapon depots or installations that house ICBM missiles, it doesn't make any difference. There is a long history of personnel working at these places coming forward and saying they're seeing weird machines doing surveillance and sometimes even meddling with the technology itself, and they don't know what they are. Why would I ignore that? Why would it be logical to ignore that? It's not logical to ignore that. If you want to be skeptical, that's okay. But being so certain that they're all mistaken in what they're seeing, I'm sorry, that's not intelligent. Why would I ignore all of the aviators that have come forward over the many decades? The one we know real well now is Commander David Fravor. But I mean, there have been tons of pilots and aviators coming forward saying they're seeing weird stuff in the sky and they're registering it on their radar. It's a lot of times it's being seen by multiple people, sometimes in the sky and on the ground. I mean, at what point do you dismember your dogmatism and say, you know what? Maybe there's something to this. This all brings us to a very famous quote made by researcher, journalist, and filmmaker Jeremy Corbell. He stated on Phenomenon Radio program on September 28th, 2018. I will tell you this now and I'll be proven right later, but I'll put it on the record now. That there are multiple UFO programs going at this time that are not being named right now, and there are 4 in particular that will probably come out. Here are some corroborating statements by astrophysicist Dr. Bernard Haisch. And I don't know if Dr. Haisch's sources are the same as Jeremy Corbell or different. Regardless, this will give more commentary regarding what these 4 UFO programs may entail and the amount of money that has gone into them over many decades. Dr. Bernard Haisch dropped the following bombshell discovered by Giuliano Marinkovic on his website shortly after December 16th, so here's the quote from the website that's now defunct, and the parentheses that follows is my comment that I'm assuming I got contextually by what precedes this quote. And here's the quote by astrophysicist Dr. Bernard Haisch. Sources tell me that this is merely the tip of the iceberg. Regarding what's the tip of the iceberg, Dr. Haisch is referencing the Nimitz UAP event series, official government-released UAP gun camera footage, and the ATIP program being revealed to the world. He continues. A group of 4 related but separate unacknowledged SCI sensitive compartmented information programs tracing back to a 1947 Truman Memorandum still exist and were housed as of the 1990s in major aerospace companies such as, for example, Lockheed, TRW, Raytheon Aerospace Corp., etc. These would be expensive programs since the cost of secrecy can be several times higher than the research. The ATIP program has no relation to these 4 much better funded deep black ones. Indeed, the black programs collectively have budgets in the $10 billion range and up. Topics apparently include both reverse engineering and extraterrestrial biology. The ATIP did find the UFO crash retrieval program via official channels, but was denied access to it because the ATIP itself is not a special access program. Senator Harry Reid petitioned the DoD to confer SAP status to the ATIP, but the DoD denied his request. Now, I will say regarding Dr. Haisch that George Knapp, a long time ago, he made a tweet. He's since deleted it. He deleted it, I think, shortly after he made it, but he said basically that Dr. Haisch is well respected and well connected, and that his speculation is not idle chit-chat. Now, his Dr. Haisch's website is now defunct. It's gone. I don't have a copy of it in front of me. I'm sure UFO Google probably has it somewhere in his vault somewhere. But my understanding is this is what Dr. Haisch has gleaned from talking to high-level officials in the government. That's all I can say. Now, can we take this sentiment? Can we take the sentiment by Jeremy Corbell and Dr. Haisch to the bank? And the answer is, sure, you can do whatever you want. It's a free country, but I'm not taking it to the bank. In fact, I would recommend cautiousness on whether these statements have validity or not. On the other hand, I would also suggest being cautious of ignoring them or assuming they're not true, or even assuming there's a great chance they're not true. Now, that's the wrong approach, in my opinion. Now, let me make it clear. Let me give you a metaphor. Let's say the mob exists, right? Which it does. But let's say the government was covering up that the mob exists. The government was lying to American citizens and telling everyone that says the mob exists that no, it doesn't. And let's say skeptics of the world were basically saying, no, the mob doesn't really exist. This is what's actually happening, or whatever. Just put that in your mind. Now, let's say decades and decades and decades later, the government's like, oh, well, we lied. The mob exists. Now, let's say some very reliable people come forward after this happens and says, the mob is setting up casinos in Las Vegas. Well, if all I had to go on was people were saying that the mob was setting up casinos in Las Vegas, I would tell you to be cautious. That might not be true. But since we know the mob exists, it also might be true. You see where I'm getting? So I think we're at a point now where, I mean, we know for a fact that there were two separate programs studying UAP intelligence. Now there's one, and this was after the U.S. government told everyone that they're not interested in UFOs, and they stopped studying with the close of Project Blue Book. So is it plausible that there could be four major UFO programs, and part of what they do is study alien biology and striving to back engineer UFO technology? It's absolutely plausible. Absolutely. There have been stories for decades of crash retrievals, of UAP crashing. Now, could they have retrieved alien bodies as well as hardware? Of course they could have. I don't know if they did, but they could have. My point is, we're at a place now where these sort of claims cannot be easily brushed off. And there may come a time where these claims get established as ground truth. So you might want to prepare yourself for that psychologically and spiritually, because it might be coming. Now, with all this being said, do I think that we as a civilization are going to get disclosure? It could come from another country, but let's say it comes from the United States, and I like to call it confirmation. Do I think we're going to get that? The answer is yes, I do. I think it's inevitable. I think that most conspiracies are false. And if you look into the historical record, that's an established reality. But every so often, there are conspiracies that are true. Do I think that governments across the world who had evidence of non-human intelligence have decided to keep it under wraps? Yes, I do. This isn't going to be a video about why they chose to do it, but it's really not a stretch. And I'll give you a perfect example. If I was the head of the Air Force and I was dealing with something I didn't understand, I didn't know what it was, and it was my job to ensure that my airspace was safe and there were no potential threats, and I wasn't fulfilling my job in this arena when it comes to UAP, and worst of all, I don't know what they are, and worse still, I don't know what their agenda is, would I feel compelled to break that open, to open that can of worms? The answer is no. No. I would not want to touch that with a 48,300 light year pole. I wouldn't. Now, does that mean I would be motivated to lie to the American public? Well, this is a very complex situation. I'd like to believe that I would do everything in my power to ensure that the mature and responsible thing was done. However, I don't think it has been. The point I'm trying to make is, I'm a huge disclosure advocate, and I'm telling you that if I was a high-level employee in the Air Force, I wouldn't want to touch this with an infinite pole. I wouldn't want to get behind the podium and tell an entire nation of 300 plus million people that this is the facts. There's machines in our airspace and in our oceans. We don't know what they are. We don't know what their intent is, and there's nothing we can do about it. Who would want to broach that? Who? In all realism, who would want to broach that? And I suspect this is true for every nation. And this psychological factor has manifested with every nation. That's why it's been, quote unquote, covered up for decades, because no one wants to go there. No one wants to go there, but go there they shall. We've had many, what I like to call, disclosure warriors in the past and in today. And it's obviously subjective who we would consider a disclosure warrior. But I'm going to emphasize two that we all are aware of right now. And that would be Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon. Both with long careers in the government. And in my opinion, both know, KNOW, that we're not alone. And that we're being engaged by non-human intelligence. Because of these gentlemen and others, but I'm emphasizing these gentlemen, The issue is going to be forced because they're going to be relentless and they're going to keep marching forward, and there's nothing that's going to stop them. And there's nothing that's going to stop me, and there's nothing that's going to stop UFO Twitter, and there's nothing that's going to stop every human being who demands that their governments desist from lying to them. Nothing can alter this now. It is the way. In the following clip that I'm going to share with you from a podcast called That UFO Podcast, right before the clip that I'm going to share with you, Elizondo explains that him and his colleagues have been running this effort much like a military or an intelligence campaign. And this campaign has consisted of pillars. You're going to find out what those pillars are. And Elizondo says that with these pillars, you have to make sure that one is not taller than the other. They all have to be equally distributed and done with commitment. He likens it to a house. If you have a roof, you can't have one side higher than the other because then the roof would be cockeyed. So what are these 5 pillars that Elizondo, Mellon, and so forth have been committed to? Well, let's find out.
So the 5 pillars are, the first one has been legislative engagement. And that's in making sure that our senior elected officials in this country, the committees, are properly briefed into the phenomenon. The next pillar has been senior executive engagement on the executive branch, senior leadership. So that would be engaging those individuals in the executive branch that need to be briefed. So, for example, everybody knows that in the last administration, the president had been briefed a few times. The Secretary of Defense was briefed. The former director of the CIA. So it's now coming to light that these people were briefed. So that was the second pillar, executive engagement, executive level engagement. The third pillar has been international engagement, engaging those friends and allies in other countries, our counterparts, that are interested in having this conversation. They're seeing something too. They never really wanted to say anything, but now that the U.S. has stepped forward, they can reach forward and say, hey, we'd like to talk to you about this topic because we've got some questions. Like you saw with Japan recently, and they've come out and established a relationship with the United States for the explicit purposes of sharing UAP information. That's a big deal, right? And then the fourth pillar is media engagement, making sure that mainstream media has enough information so they know they can have an elevated conversation about the topic. We're no longer talking about tinfoil hats and Elvis on the mothership. We're talking about science. We're talking about quantum physics. We're talking about a real issue that we have right now, something that is in our skies. We don't know what it is. We don't know where it's from. We don't really know how it works, and there's not much we can do about it. That's a tough discussion to have. And media is finally taking it seriously, despite this, 70 some odd years of ridicule and bad Hollywood movies about the topic. And then the fifth pillar is engaging the masses, engaging people. And that is critically important. And so
I really love this stratagem. I think it's extremely thorough, and I think it will be extremely impactful and efficacious. And I think it will help facilitate us into a new world where we all belong, as opposed to the dark ages, which in a sense I think we are in right now. And I know that sounds extreme, but think of it this way. If it's true, we're not alone in the universe and we're being engaged. There are machines in our skies and our seas that are unaccounted for, then we should probably be talking about that and not behaving and engaging our lives as if it's a fairy tale or if it's fantasy, because I believe it's 100% true. And I believe that I'm going to be vindicated in that. Anyways, I think Elizondo, Mellon, and others who are engaging this campaign using the stratagem of the 5 pillars, they're going to find some profound success. And I'm not saying they're the only ones that are going to make this happen. I'm just emphasizing them. If you want to make a video, you can emphasize whoever you want. You know what I mean? It's a free country. One of the reasons I think they're going to be so successful is because we are in a new environment. And I will liken it to how technology grows exponentially. As you all know, is that technology gets better, and then it gets better, and then it gets better. But a common denominator is, as it gets better over a stretch of time, this segment of time it takes for it to get much better gets smaller and smaller and smaller. That's why they call it exponential. And I think we're going to start seeing this with the disclosure effort and the 5 pillars. I think that the efforts of Mellon and Elizondo and others is going to start having some tremendous impact upon the way the world looks at UAP. Eventually, it's no longer going to be fringe at all. Eventually, there's going to be no more debate. The debate of whether UAP exists and whether or not they are of non-human intelligence, in my opinion, will eventually evaporate. And we'll make that transition. And we'll transition into an obsession and trying to figure out what are they and what their agenda is. And it will help nations of the world to put down some of our differences and focus on something we can all engage together, trying to figure out perhaps the greatest enigma in scientific history, or at least one of them. I guess the number one would be, does consciousness survive death? But the fact of the matter is we have way more evidence for UAP than we do for consciousness surviving death, at least in my opinion. So it's a good time to be alive. And I'm sure that what I just stated in this segment, some are going to think I'm crazy, and I respect that. But everyone has to call it like they see it and put their chips down where they think it's going to benefit them. The following is an amazing quote by Elizondo from an interview with Jimmy Church that took place on February 2nd, 2021. In this quote is first Jimmy Church asking a question and then Elizondo responding. I think Elizondo's response gets to the heart of where this is all headed. Did you see video evidence while at ATIP that freaked you out? And what I mean by that, not the Nimitz videos. That stuff's not freak out material. It's not. Did you see a black triangle? Did you see something close up? Did you see something that you could classify as a classic flying saucer? Things that the public has never seen? Absolutely. And I'm not going to go further than that. Absolutely. That is the reason why I'm so compelled to do what I'm doing. I know what I've seen. I know others have seen it as well. And that's why when the Congress people go into these briefings and they're kind of like, I'm going to go take a briefing, and they come out and they say, holy cow, we got to take this seriously. They are not looking at grainy video taken during the Nimitz cruise. They're looking at data and information that is very classified with a much greater degree of fidelity that allows them to then make that decision. By the way, at a unanimous level, they've all come out saying, holy smokes, we need to look at this. And some have even come out and said, this ain't ours. These are pretty bold statements coming from your elected officials, whereas 2 years ago, they would have laughed. They wouldn't have even taken an audience with you. They would have laughed you right out of the room. And now they are having a very sober conversation about this. You have a task force that has been established under no other person than the Deputy Secretary of Defense himself. In the opening of this video, I showed you a clip in which Representative Dan Crenshaw said it was his assessment that aliens are among us, more or less. And I don't know, and I don't think he's ever been officially briefed classified information. He's just going on what the witnesses have stated and in the gun camera footage that was provided in the public domain. And that's only the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? I demonstrated to you, at least according to Elizondo, and I think Elizondo is a very good source. And members of Congress have stated it themselves, so I don't really think it's a question at this point. But people within Congress have been given classified briefings on UAP, being given information of much higher fidelity of what we're dealing with. And so I only think we're going to see more and more of this because I think the data is there. And that once that data starts to see the light of day and more people get briefed on it at a certain point, and when people see the obvious, now look, I'm not 100% we're being visited by non-human intelligence. I believe we are. Belief, it doesn't have to be 100%. But my assessment, which is not knowledge, I'm telling you what I assess. My assessment is that this is only going to escalate because the data is there. And the data is going to start seeing the light of day more and more because of the 5 pillars, because of pressure, because of evolution. Things will get a lot more weird as we push forward. But we'll all be more rational because of it. Special thanks to all my patrons and YouTube members. If you're interested in supporting me in that fashion, there's links in the description. And if you've watched this whole video, whether you're a YouTube member or a patron or not, I extend my sincere gratitude. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.